There is a specific kind of cold that settles deep into your marrow when you spend your nights maintaining industrial seafood freezers in Astoria, Oregon. It doesn't wash out in a hot shower. It stays with you heavy and damp, smelling faintly of ozone, ammonia, and crushed fish scales. I am 61 years old, and for the last 10 years, that bitter coastal cold has been my only reliable companion. Eleanor certainly wasn't. My wife moved through our small, rain-battered house like a guest who had been severely disappointed by the accommodations. She never really looked at me anymore. She looked through me, past the frayed, worn elbows of my flannel work shirts, past the black engine grease permanently stained into the creases of my knuckles. The only time her eyes caught any genuine light was when her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter with a text message from Silicon Valley. Julian, our only son. Julian made his first millions in venture capital before he turned 30. Eleanor built an actual shrine to his financial success on our living room mantelpiece. The centerpiece of it all was a framed feature article from a national tech magazine. I stood in the hallway and watched her one evening, a microfiber rag in her hand, carefully wiping a microscopic speck of dust from the glass over Julian's smiling face. She spent 10 full minutes polishing that silver frame. She didn't spend one single second looking down at my frozen mud-caked work boots, thawing on the rubber mat right beneath it. That was the established hierarchy of our lives. I was the embarrassing cautionary tale. Julian was the Messiah, and I accepted it, swallowing my pride daily. Because 10 years ago, my maritime logistics business went belly up and dragged the family savings down into the abyss with it. I had earned my place at the bottom of the stairs. Then came a Tuesday night in early November. The ocean rain was coming down in thick, violent sheets, hammering against the corrugated tin roof of the packing plant. The compressor on freezer unit 4 had seized up, shrieking like a wounded animal. I reached up with a heavy steel pipe wrench, straining my shoulders to torque a rusted overhead valve. Then, the world just stopped. A sharp, metallic taste flooded the back of my throat, like sucking on a dirty copper penny. Right. My chest didn't just hurt. It felt like a massive iron anchor had been dropped from a great height directly onto my sternum. The heavy wrench slipped from my numb fingers, clattering loudly against the grated steel walkway. My knees simply gave out. The last thing I felt was the icy, frost-covered concrete floor biting into my cheek as the overhead halogen lights faded into a suffocating black. I woke up to the rhythmic, synthetic beep of a cardiac monitor. The air in the hospital room was painfully dry, reeking of sterile alcohol wipes and stale cafeteria coffee. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, finding a tired-looking cardiologist in blue scrubs standing at the foot of my bed. He didn't have a comforting bedside manner. He had a clipboard and a schedule to keep. "You have severe aortic valve failure, Arthur," he stated flatly, tapping his silver pen against the plastic chart. "Your heart is actively pushing fluid back into your lungs. We need to get a mechanical valve in there. Soon." I stared up at the water stains on the acoustic ceiling tiles. "How soon?" "Days." He jotted something down, never once meeting my eyes. "A week at the absolute maximum before the strain causes a catastrophic rupture. You won't survive it." He stepped out into the busy hallway, and the grim reality of modern medicine stepped right in. A young woman from the billing department carrying an iPad and wearing a terribly nervous smile replaced him in the doorway. She walked me through the tangled, unforgiving web of my bottom-tier employer health insurance. High deductibles, out-of-network surgical teams, exorbitant facility fees. I can try to petition the board for financial aid after the fact, she murmured, her fingernails tapping nervously against the glass screen. But the surgical team is a private medical group. They require their out-of-pocket copay before they will even book the operating room. It's their strict policy. How much? I rasped, my throat still raw from an oxygen tube they had removed hours ago. She looked down at her sensible shoes. $4,200. $4,200. Before my shipping business collapsed a decade ago, I would have spent that on a weekend fishing trip to Alaska without bothering to check my bank balance. Now I lay trapped in a stiff hospital bed, doing the agonizing math of absolute poverty. My credit score was a complete graveyard. No bank in Oregon would lend me a single dollar, let alone $4,000. Eleanor's meager part-time wages at the library barely covered the weekly groceries and the winter heating bill. I had nothing to offer, nothing to sell. I closed my heavy eyes, listening to the coastal rain lashing violently against the hospital window, and thought of the Frame magazine clipping, resting on my mantelpiece. I didn't want to make the call. I felt physically sick at the mere thought of begging him, but pride is a luxury reserved strictly for the healthy, and I was completely out of time. I had a son worth 8 figures, closing million-dollar deals in luxury hotel suites. And I was about to ask him for the price of my life. I signed myself out against medical advice the next morning, clutching a plastic bag of generic blood thinners that crinkled loudly in the quiet cab. The cold Oregon rain hadn't stopped. It beat a frantic, merciless rhythm against the windshield of my rusted Ford pickup. I sat in the sprawling hospital parking lot, the heater blowing weak, lukewarm air that smelled faintly of burning dust and wet dog. I gripped the cracked vinyl steering wheel. The cheap metal of my wedding band dug painfully into my swollen knuckle, the skin around it turning a bruised, mottled purple in the freezing cabin. $4,200. The math looped endlessly in my foggy brain, refusing to yield a different answer, no matter how many times I rearranged the numbers. I stared at the flashing cursor on my cracked phone screen for 30 minutes before I finally pressed Julian's name. He answered on the 5th ring. The background noise bled through the tiny speaker instantly. The sharp clinking of crystal flutes, a heavy bass line, the bright, entitled laughter of people who had never once worried about a winter heating bill or the price of groceries. "Make it quick, Arthur," Julian clipped, dispensing with the title of Dad entirely. "We're in the middle of a buyout celebration at the Chateau in Whistler. The champagne is getting warm." I closed my eyes, pressing the cold phone harder against my ear to drown out the storm. "Julian, my heart is failing. The aortic valve is giving out. I need surgery by Friday or I'm not going to make it." The laughter in the background continued, completely oblivious to the death sentence hanging in my truck cab. "Right, okay," Julian sighed, annoyance bleeding through his crisp, practiced tone. "So, put it on a credit card. Have the hospital bill you. What do you want me to do about it?" "They need a copay deposit to book the operating room," I whispered, the shame tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. $4,200. I don't have it. My credit is ruined. I need your help." A heavy silence stretched across the cellular towers. "Are you kidding me?" Julian's voice dropped an octave into pure ice. "I spent my entire 20s digging myself out of the financial crater you left this family in. I missed out on every major networking opportunity in college because you bankrupted us over a contaminated dock. I'm finally at my peak earning years, and you want to drag me down? Julian, this is for my life. This is consequence, Arthur." The absolute lack of hesitation chilled me deeper than the winter outside. I am not subsidizing your failures anymore. Tell the hospital to set up a payment plan." The line clicked dead. I sat in the deafening silence of the truck cab. The rain felt infinitely heavier now, pounding the steel roof. No. My own son had just calculated the exact market value of my life and found it lacking. My hands shook violently as I dialed Eleanor's number. I needed my wife to remind our son that a human life was worth more than a ski trip in British Columbia. "Hello," she answered, sounding breathless and annoyed. "Eleanor," I choked out, struggling for air. "I'm in the hospital lot. My heart is giving out. I need a deposit for the surgery." Julian hung up on me. A long, agonizing pause. I waited for the gasp. I waited for the panic of a woman who had stood beside me at an altar 32 years ago. "Why on earth would you call Julian right now?" Eleanor hissed. The breath vanished from my lungs. "He is closing the biggest acquisition of his quarter," she continued, her voice tight with furious indignation. "Do you have any idea how much stress he's under? How dare you disrupt his celebration to guilt-trip him about money?" "I'm dying, Eleanor," I breathed, staring blankly at the rain-streaked glass. "Stop being so terribly dramatic," she snapped, brushing away my mortality like a nuisance. "You always do this. You make terrible financial decisions, and then you expect everyone else to clean up the mess. I am barely keeping the lights on with my meager library checks. I just need you to talk to him." "No." The word struck me like a physical blow. "Call Clara. She works in healthcare. Maybe she can navigate the billing department. Leave Julian alone." She hung up before I could reply. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. The heater fan whined pathetically, blowing cold air over my trembling fingers. "Naon?" That was the exact moment my marriage officially died. It didn't end with screaming matches. It ended with a quiet dial tone in a freezing parking lot. I looked at the contact list on my cracked screen, hovering over my daughter's name. Clara, the sweet, exhausted child who had absolutely nothing to spare. The terrifying truth settled like heavy river stones in my failing heart. I was going to have to drag her down into the dark water with me. I drove from the hospital parking lot straight to the waterfront, the cold dial tone of my dead marriage still echoing in the damp cab of my truck. I met Clara at a rain-slicked diner near the port, a crumbling local fixture reeking of old fryer grease, damp wool, and stale cigarette smoke. The neon sign buzzed aggressively in the fogged window, casting a flickering blood-red glow over our cracked vinyl booth. I ordered black coffee, wrapping my freezing hands around the thick, chipped ceramic mug just to steal its warmth. The bitter, burnt taste coated my tongue, mirroring the absolute shame sitting heavy in my chest. Clara walked in wearing her faded pediatric scrubs, her shoulders slumped beneath a soaked raincoat from an exhausting day of physical therapy sessions. She slid into the booth across from me, brushing wet hair from her forehead. I intended to lie. I truly did. I planned to sip my coffee, ask about her patients, and pretend my heart wasn't ticking down to a catastrophic halt. She took one look at my pale, sweaty face, her eyes narrowing beneath the harsh diner lights. "Take off your jacket, Arthur." She dropped the title of Dad sometimes, but unlike Julian, it was a term of endearment, a way to ground me in reality when I was spinning out. "You look like a ghost walking the docks. What exactly did the cardiologist find?" I stared down at the dark reflection in my coffee mug. The words felt like ground glass in my throat. I confessed the failing aortic valve, the timeline, the arrogant refusal from Julian in Whistler, and the exact dollar amount standing between me and the grave. $4,200. Clara didn't blink. She didn't offer empty platitudes, roll her eyes, or waste precious time cursing our family's deeply fractured state. Instead, she reached into her worn canvas tote bag and placed her keychain on the sticky Formica table. My eyes locked onto it. The heavy, black electronic fob for her specialized wheelchair-accessible transit van, the vehicle she desperately needed to transport her disabled pediatric patients, was conspicuously missing. A single empty silver ring dangled loosely on the chain. "I stopped by the commercial dealership on the way here," she murmured, tapping a digital approval screen on her phone and sliding it toward me. "I sold the van back to them, and I took out a short-term, high-risk loan to cover the remaining gap. The hospital deposit clears tomorrow morning." The chaotic diner noise, the clattering plates, the low hum of the rain, the distant blare of the foghorns, evaporated into total silence. "Clara!" I gasped, the air completely leaving my failing lungs. "Your clinic, your patients, you need that specialized van to survive." She reached across the table, her small, calloused hands gripping my trembling fingers with a fierce, unwavering strength that terrified me. "Vehicles are just metal and plastic, Arthur." Her voice never wavered, completely devoid of hesitation or regret. "I am not letting you die because Julian wants to buy another luxury condo. I'll take the city bus." I sat in that crumbling diner and openly wept, hiding my face in my grease-stained hands. My brilliant, wealthy son had abandoned me for a champagne toast, while my exhausted, overworked daughter just burned her own livelihood to the ground to buy me a few more years of breath. The surgery happened in a terrifying blur of blinding surgical theater lights, sterile steel instruments, and the sharp, icy burn of anesthesia entering my veins. I woke up 3 days later on the lumpy, unforgiving cushions of a pull-out sofa in Clara's cramped one-bedroom apartment. The air smelled of cheap instant chicken broth, lingering bleach, and the damp mildew that haunts every cheap rental on the coast. The thin walls offered no protection from the heavy, thumping boots of the upstairs neighbors or the relentless Oregon downpour lashing violently against the single-pane window. My chest felt like it had been split open with a fire axe and stitched back together with barbed wire. Every breath was a jagged, breathless agony. Yet, the physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the agony of watching my daughter's new morning routine. At 5:30 in the morning, the floorboards creaked. I lay perfectly still under a thin, scratchy blanket, watching Clara through the half-open kitchen doorway. She was pulling on a heavy waterproof coat over her scrubs, her face drawn and pale with sheer exhaustion. She shoved a laminated city transit pass into her pocket, staring out at the pitch-black, freezing rain. Because of my debt, she now faced a grueling 2-hour commute on 3 different public buses just to reach her clinic. She quietly locked the deadbolt behind her, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of her tiny living room. I stared at the water-stained ceiling, feeling the steady, mechanical click of the new valve in my chest. A deep, freezing resolve began to replace the paralyzing shame I had carried for a decade. I survived the surgery, but an entirely different kind of man woke up on that sofa. I was going to repay my daughter's blood money, even if it took my last remaining days on Earth. But I didn't realize that the ghosts of my ruined past were already surfacing from the dark waters, rushing toward that very apartment to change our lives forever. I spent the next 2 weeks anchored to that lumpy pull-out sofa, memorizing the exact sound of Clara's heavy transit boots, dragging across the floorboards every evening. The guilt was a suffocating weight in my new chest, heavier than the titanium valve ticking relentlessly behind my ribs. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside the single window was the color of bruised iron. A sharp, impatient knock shattered the quiet hum of the ancient refrigerator. I shuffled to the door, favoring my healing sternum, and found a drenched postal worker holding a digital scanner. "Need a signature, Arthur," he muttered, shaking the freezing rain from his cap. He handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope. The return address in the upper corner hit me like a physical punch. The Oregon State Department of Ecology. I carried it to Clara's cheap, wobbly kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly. 10 years ago, I owned a thriving maritime logistics company right on the Astoria waterfront. It was a brutal, beautiful life until the Iron Reach dock collapsed during a freak winter squall. The disaster unearthed decades of buried asbestos and toxic industrial runoff. The state swooped in instantly. They slapped a severe environmental hold on the entire 40-acre parcel, locking it in a bureaucratic quarantine. It became an unsellable, radioactive nightmare that completely decimated my credit and destroyed my life. I sat in the dim apartment, tracing the edge of the envelope. I expected another delay, another demand for exorbitant soil testing fees. I tore the thick paper open. 2 distinct letters slid out, resting starkly against the peeling cheap wood veneer of Clara's kitchen table, a golden detail of impossible wealth invading absolute poverty. The first letter was printed on heavy, cream-colored state stationery. I read the bolded paragraph 3 times, my brain refusing to process the clinical, bureaucratic language. Remediation status complete. The environmental quarantine on the aforementioned 40-acre waterfront parcel is hereby lifted, effective immediately. Site is cleared for commercial redevelopment. A decade of suffocation, gone in a single ink stroke. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I reached for the second letter. It wasn't from the government. It was stamped with the sleek embossed logo of a massive multinational tech conglomerate based out of Seattle. Apex Global Solutions. While my contaminated land sat rotting under a federal lock for 10 years, the tech industry had grown desperate for coastal property to build massive data cooling centers. They needed deep water intake pipes, and my ruined dock possessed the exact industrial infrastructure they required. It was an aggressive, unsolicited commercial offer. A 30-day close, no contingencies, $18.5 million in cash. I didn't yell. I didn't cry tears of joy. I didn't jump up and down in the cramped apartment. I sat perfectly motionless in the gray afternoon light, feeling an icy, terrifying calm wash over my entire body. The taste of stale coffee in my mouth was suddenly replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of pure adrenaline. 3 weeks ago, my son let me drown over $4,000, and now I was holding $18.5 million. I didn't call Julian. I didn't call Eleanor. I didn't want to hear the panicked, desperate backtracking they would inevitably attempt once they smelled the blood in the water. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 6 years. Marcus Vance, my old maritime attorney. A cynical, chain-smoking bulldog of a lawyer who had stayed with me during the collapse until I simply couldn't afford his retainer anymore. "Well, I'll be damned," Marcus rasped through the speaker, the sound of a heavy lighter clicking in the background. "Arthur, I heard you went under the knife. You still kicking, old man?" "I'm alive, Marcus," I replied, my voice disturbingly steady. "And I need you to go to your archives today, right now." "Arthur, I don't work for free anymore," he sighed, the fatigue heavy in his voice. "Whatever the state is demanding now, you can't fight it." "The state just released the Iron Reach dock," I interrupted, staring dead ahead at the peeling wallpaper. "And Apex Global just offered me $18.5 million cash for the parcel." Silence fell over the line. A long, breathless silence broken only by the faint crackle of Marcus's cigarette burning down to the filter. "Mother of God," Marcus finally whispered. "Arthur, that changes the entire world." I know it does, I said, leaning closer to the phone. But before I sign a single document with Apex, I need to know exactly where I stand. I need you to pull a very specific file from 6 years ago. I didn't feel joy as I stared down at the fortune resting on my daughter's table. I only felt a cold, terrifying anticipation. The steel trap had just been handed to me, and I knew exactly who I was going to catch. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, save for the faint, raspy inhale of Marcus taking another drag of his cigarette. The memory of my family's ultimate betrayal was already playing in my mind, vivid and sharp. Before the lawyer even spoke again, "You want me to pull the asset severance accord," Marcus finally said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Arthur, are you certain?" "Read it to me, Marcus," I demanded, word for exact word. While I waited for the sound of filing cabinets opening on his end, the ghosts of 6 years ago materialized right there in Clara's dim apartment. The flashback tasted exactly like the bitter lemon furniture polish Eleanor obsessively used on our dining table. Julian had just flown in from San Francisco, fresh off his MBA, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my rusted truck. He had slammed a thick, leather-bound legal folio onto the glass. "This is a firewall, Arthur," Julian had stated, his tone dripping with the cold authority of a corporate liquidator dealing with a bankrupt subsidiary. "The state ecology fines are going to bleed Mom's retirement dry. You are a massive financial liability. We are severing the estate to protect her." Eleanor had sat beside him, arms tightly crossed, refusing to even look at my face while she signed her name in sharp, aggressive strokes. They had forced me to take 100% of the Iron Reach dock, the toxic, unsellable nightmare, as my sole separate property, while Eleanor took the house, the savings, and the remaining clean assets. They thought they were building a fortress to keep my failures out. "I have it right here, Arthur." Marcus's voice pulled me violently back to the rainy present. Heavy papers shuffled over the speaker. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Eleanor Vance hereby completely and irrevocably relinquishes all present and future claims, equities, and legal entitlements to the Iron Reach maritime parcel. Marcus paused, letting out a low, disbelieving whistle. "Keep reading," I whispered, my pulse thudding heavily against my new titanium valve. "Including any proceeds, appreciations, or windfalls realized from said property, regardless of subsequent environmental remediation, zoning changes, or future commercial valuation." That's regardless of future commercial valuation. The words hung in the damp, sterile air of the apartment. They hadn't just shielded themselves from my debt. Julian, in his arrogant desperation to ensure I couldn't touch a single dime of his mother's money, had legally mandated that they could never touch a single dime of mine. Under Oregon law, it was an airtight, impenetrable vault. He outsmarted himself, Marcus murmured, a dark, raspy chuckle echoing through the phone. "Your boy built a legal cage to lock you in the dark, Arthur. And he just realized he locked himself out of a gold mine." A profound, chilling peace settled deep into my bones. The blinding rage that had been boiling in my blood for 2 weeks vanished entirely, replaced by the precise, calculated focus of a man lining up a sniper shot. "Accept the Apex Global offer immediately," I instructed, staring down at Clara's cheap plastic city transit pass resting on the table directly next to the $18 million letter. "And I want a trust established, blind, irrevocable, and fully protected from outside litigation." "Understood," Marcus said, the scratching of his fountain pen suddenly audible. "How do you want the $18.5 million structured? Who are the beneficiaries?" "Clara," I said, without a fraction of a second of hesitation. "Just Clara." She is the sole beneficiary. Every single cent goes into her name. I don't want my name on the new house we're going to buy. I don't want my name on the bank accounts. I want this fortune completely fireproof before the ink even dries. Arthur. Marcus hesitated, exhaling smoke. They are going to find out. The commercial deed transfer will become public record the second Apex logs it with the county clerk. I know, I replied, the metallic tang of adrenaline returning sharply to my mouth. That's exactly why I need you to draft the final paperwork by this Friday. We are going to have a family meeting. I hung up the phone and opened a blank text message, adding both Julian and Eleanor to the recipient list. I needed a reason to drag my wealthy, impatient son away from his tech empire and my estranged wife away from her pristine living room. I needed them to walk willingly into the trap. Meeting with Marcus at his downtown office this Friday at noon. I typed slowly. Need your signatures on the final medical bankruptcy and debt liability disclosures. Please. It will only take 10 minutes of your time. It was a pathetic, desperate-sounding message. It was exactly the kind of groveling they expected from me. Within 3 minutes, 2 identical read receipts popped up on my cracked screen. They were coming to scold the family failure one last time. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight to their own financial execution. The mahogany boardroom of Marcus's downtown law office smelled aggressively of old money, stale tobacco, and expensive leather. I sat perfectly still at the far end of the sprawling conference table, listening to the heavy Oregon rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling glass. The antique brass clock on the wall ticked with a sharp, hollow rhythm. I didn't feel my mechanical heart valve ticking anymore. I only felt the terrifying absolute stillness of the predator waiting in the blind. The heavy glass doors swung open at precisely noon. Julian strode in first, trailing the sharp scent of bergamot cologne and high-end espresso. Eleanor followed, refusing to even glance in my direction. They looked like royalty gracing a peasant's funeral. Julian didn't sit. He merely unbuttoned his bespoke suit jacket, checking his heavy silver watch with a loud, theatrical sigh. "Make this quick, Arthur," Julian clipped, pulling his phone from his pocket and placing it face up on the polished wood. "I have a board meeting in 30 minutes. Where are the bankruptcy disclosures?" Before Marcus could even open a single file, Julian's phone violently vibrated against the mahogany. A high-priority banner notification flashed across the screen. As a tech venture capitalist, Julian tracked every major commercial acquisition on the West Coast. I watched his eyes dart down out of sheer habit. I watched the arrogant, impatient color completely drain from his face, leaving behind a sickly, chalky white. "Apex Global," Julian breathed, his voice suddenly hollow, the air leaving his lungs. 18.5 million in cash. The Iron Reach parcel? He snapped his head up, his eyes locking onto mine with a frantic, wild intensity. Eleanor finally looked at me, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth. "You sold it." Julian's voice cracked. He planted both hands on the table, leaning forward aggressively. "You knew the state hold was clearing, and you sold the dock for $18 million, and you called me begging for $4 grand. You manipulative—" "Julian," Eleanor interrupted, her voice trembling with sudden, desperate greed. "Arthur, is this true? We have $18 million. "No," Julian barked, the corporate shark instantly taking over. "He's trying to hide it in bankruptcy. We are freezing every single account today, Arthur. My lawyers will have an injunction filed before you even leave this building. That is marital property. That is family money." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I reached into my faded coat pocket and withdrew Clara's cheap plastic city transit pass. The lamination was peeling from the torrential coastal rain. I placed it on the polished mahogany. It was the golden detail of my daughter's sacrifice, resting like a quiet weapon right next to his glowing $18 million notification. That was dope. Then Marcus silently slid a familiar, leather-bound document across the massive table. The pages smelled faintly of old dust and absolute finality. Julian looked down at it. It was his own masterpiece. "The asset severance accord," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, icy whisper. "The firewall you built 6 years ago to lock me out of your mother's money. Do you remember the specific verbiage you drafted, Julian?" Julian stared at his own signature at the bottom of the page. His breath started coming in short, panicked gasps. "Regardless of future commercial valuation," Marcus rasped, lighting a cigarette right there in the pristine boardroom. "Your mother signed away every legal right to the Iron Reach parcel, regardless of what it was worth. You didn't just protect her retirement, kid. You legally cemented that property as Arthur's sole separate asset, untouchable by divorce, injunction, or marital claim." Eleanor's eyes widened in sheer horror. She turned to her son. "Julian, what is he saying? Tell him he's wrong. Tell him." Julian didn't speak. His jaw worked frantically, but absolutely no sound came out. He was staring into the exact cage he had built, realizing he was the one locked outside in the freezing rain. "The money cleared yesterday," I said, leaning forward into the heavy silence. "And this morning, an irrevocable trust was finalized in Clara's name, every single cent. First, we wired a payoff to her predatory lender and bought back her van. The rest is firewalled. Not a dime is coming to either of you. Because 3 weeks ago, my daughter sold her livelihood and took out a loan with 22% interest to buy me a new heart. She rode the city bus at dawn so I could live. You," I pointed a heavy, grease-stained finger at Julian, "told me to ask the hospital for a payment plan so you wouldn't ruin your ski trip." Eleanor began to openly weep, a pathetic, ugly sound echoing off the glass walls. But there was no pity left inside me. "You wanted to be completely severed from my failures," I whispered, standing up slowly from my leather chair. "Congratulations, Eleanor. You got exactly what you wanted. You are officially severed from my success, too." I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy glass door. I didn't look back as they stood there in the deafening, suffocating silence of their own making, the absolute ruins of their arrogance. I stepped out of the law office lobby and onto the wet pavement of the city. The cold Oregon rain was still falling, washing the scent of the harbor across the gray streets. I walked toward the bus stop, waiting to meet the new millionaire who was just finishing her shift. For the very first time in 10 years, I wasn't freezing anymore. I felt entirely perfectly warm.